Welcome. How's everybody doing tonight? Southern California is full of untold stories, but even more that go unheard.
Authentic first-person experiences of life in Southern California. Real people amplified.
Each show is unique because of who's involved and where we are. Some of our folks are experienced storytellers. Many are not. And for some, this is their first time on stage or speaking in public.
And tonight's show is reflective of the range of voices, experiences, and perspectives of those involved.
Together, we explore our region one story at a time.
A special thank you to the California Wellness Foundation for their generous support of this project.
No show would be complete without a host. Please join me in welcoming your Unheard LA host, Bruce Lemon.
What's good, LA? Welcome y'all to Unheard LA, a deeper listen. I'm your host, Bruce Lemon, and this is part 2 in a special 3-part virtual event version of the show where we reconnect with some of our alumni, revisit their stories, and reconvene in conversation with our community about this moment of change. We're coming together from all over SoCal. I'm broadcasting live from my garage in Watts, and we would love to know where you are safer at home. So if you're near your keyboard, go ahead and type it in the comments or shout it out to your neighbor across the street or even into your mask. We may not be in a theater, but I hope you have a great seat at home, folks. The Unheard LA team is spread all across our region, from San Dimas to Thousand Oaks, to Pasadena, to historic Filipino town, to Glendale, to West Athens, to Silver Lake, to Mid-City, and beyond. So let us know where you are. You don't even have to be in SoCal because we're online now. Last week, we talked about the police, the badge, black hair, and more. You can catch that episode in its entirety, and there's so much more to discuss and so many more voices to hear. I hope we're all having these conversations, and I hope we're all listening. We are a nation in protest and transition, a time where many people are telling their stories, some for the first time, some again and again and again, and hope that someone is really listening. But now that we have each other's attention, we felt this is a time to revisit some of the stories shared on the Unheard LA stage that reflect on the ways in which racism has shaped the lives and experiences in Southern California. A deeper listen, one that we hope can lead to deeper understanding, compassion, and change. We'll hear from and be joined by Cheryl Farrell, Eddie M. Ghana Jr. from SETI, and Aiden K., along with Dana Emma here, co-editor and developer of Race in LA, for a live conversation that we want you to play an active part in by asking questions in the online chat. Yeah, community is essential to this program and to our survival. These are the people that lift you up, that make you feel at home in an unfamiliar place. They are where you are. And our first story of the night highlights one such community. Here is Sisterhood of Black Women Over 50 by Cheryl Farrell.
I have lived in Thousand Oaks for about 11 years. Before that, I lived in Glendale, California, and I lived in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, known for the Amish. The pattern of living where there are few African Americans is unintentional on my part. For reasons of work mainly, my family has lived where we are often strangers or strange looking in our hometown. And so I have found a different type of community whose members live throughout Southern California, as well as in other parts of the United States. It's a community defined by race, gender, and age. Yes, you guessed it. I live in the Sisterhood of Black Women Over 50. No, it's not sister with an R. It's sister. The spelling representing a legacy of women who thrive in the face of negative racial stereotypes. Add ageism to the mix, we're no longer a coveted advertising demographic, even though we still got it going on and got money to spend. The Sisterhood has many accomplished members. Some of them are known by their first name only. I call them the Great O's. There's Oprah, Viola, Michelle Obama, and there are others. Pioneers include Anita Hill, whose 1991 congressional testimony first brought to light sexual harassment in the workplace. And there are millions of my community members who live without celebrity, We are business owners, philanthropists, scientists, and hold just about any profession you can name. We are often unsung heroes as nurturers from way back. Our community was counted in labor statistics long before blacks and women could even vote. Why? Because our mothers' mothers were nannies to other people's children. Sisters have become experts at code switching, that is, presenting a non-threatening countenance to people who don't know us. We are actors, not always by profession, but by nature, by necessity. One personal example of code switching comes from when I lived in Glendale. We had a lovely Spanish home near the foothills, and I so enjoyed the tree-lined streets and well-manicured lawns. I made a habit of jogging in the area on Saturday mornings. For most runs, I threw on sweatpants, a t-shirt, and a baseball cap. But I soon realized the mere sight of a black person running toward folk made them change route, as if a primal urge to do so. I experimented by starting my run on the opposite side of the street, and it still happened. I tried dressing up for my runs. I bought coordinating jogging outfits, and I ran without a cap. I even put on makeup to have a smooth complexion, and I bought tiny little earrings to signal I was a woman, maybe less of a threat. Still, they crossed the street. One woman who pulled her Mercedes to a corner mailbox exited her car, and as I was approaching, she turned around and activated her car lock. Boop, boop. The chirp was the signal that I made her uncomfortable. I was tempted to wear a sandwich sign during my jogs that read, "I'm no threat, have large mortgage in the area, and current on my payments." My experiment continued. I decided to walk instead of run. In addition, I invited a white female friend to join me. I didn't let her in on my undercover strategy. To my surprise, not one person crossed the street. Many of the passerby greeted us, "Good morning, nice day for a walk." As I recall, I even got close enough to compliment one woman's beautiful baby in a stroller. Now, when I clued my walking partner in on the experiment, her take was, "Oh, you're just being hypersensitive. I can't believe it makes a difference if you're white or black and exercising." But when I told the story to my sister girl, her immediate response was, "Mm-hmm." That's code for, "Girl, you got that right." You see, with the sisterhood, there's no need to explain the triple whammy of race, gender, and age as a load to carry. And we do so as role models for our daughters. As important, it allows us to show love and grace to those who fear the unfamiliar, even in our richly diverse Los Angeles. Now, there's no annual convention of the sisterhood, but we know each other by our common experiences. If there were a convention, I imagine our theme song would go something like this. I'm old and I know it, but I try not to show it. I still got some living to do. There's a dream with my name written on it. There's a cloud I'm supposed to fly. Yes, I'm old and I know it, but I try not to show it. I still got some living to do. I still got some living to do.
Oh, man, that was great. Where are you from? Never a question I wanted to hear growing up as a teenager in Watts, but one I love to answer these days. But what does it mean? Is it the physical location of your birth? Is it the city you've called home since your parents immigrated here in the 90s? Or is it the field you play in as an artist, as an architect, or as an activist? Well, here is the very first story ever shared on the Unheard LA stage. Where Are You From? By Eddie M. Ghana Jr. and Stephanie Sager, aka Steady.
I was born and raised in LA.
I am a Bay Area transplant.
My mom immigrated in 1978 to Chicago, or as she called it, the coldest place in the world. My dad immigrated to Los Angeles in 1982, or as he calls it, the year E.T. was in theaters. They both came to the United States for the potentially homogenous reason to find a better life. For many Filipinos, a better life did not mean enriching themselves, but helping out the entire family back home. Every month, my parents never failed to send care packages known as balikbayan boxes full of essentials, toiletries, clothes, and of course, candy. Also important to note, my parents moved from the Philippines during the reign of Ferdinand Marcos, a dictator who thrust the country into martial law. My dad was studying to be a lawyer at the time. He was studying law because, as he said, he wanted to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. But because martial law was declared, he wasn't sure if the country would even need lawyers anymore. My mom, on the other hand, was a nurse. She was part of what's called the brain drain, in which educated Filipinos look for jobs overseas because the country is unable to supply jobs. In fact, one could say that the Philippines' biggest export is not a product, but its people.
To trace my story is to follow my parents from the Philippines. My dad came here in September 1975. He was a teenager and played basketball for a local high school in San Jose. He also worked at A&W, which he would remind me every time I visited. From time to time, he would visit the Philippines. In February 1986 was when he met my mother. After a series of dates and becoming official, they were engaged in April and only had about a month to plan their marriage in June. This was 1986. Rather than going back to the States, my dad stayed with my mom as she was waiting for her visa to be approved. She worked as a doctor of internal medicine. In 1987, she became pregnant, and they wanted so much for me to be born in America. 2 months before I was born, my dad and mom came here, January 1988. My mom's education translated into working as a unit assistant, and my dad continued to work as a storage mover. They lived in Sunnyvale for about 3 years and worked full-time, overtime, until they were able to finally afford a house in Union City. My story is this: I was conceived in the Philippines, but born here in America.
Being the child of immigrants is something that we carry with pride.
Always.
At the same time, as people who carry the privilege of being born here,
Us married here.
immigration status is something we didn't have to actively think about constantly.
However, as someone who is brown, as people who are brown, we carry the look of the so-called perpetual foreigner.
Like when someone asks you, where are you from? I'm from Pico
Union
Rivera,
City, UC.
Pico.
I'm from the Bay Area.
I'm from Los Angeles.
I'm from 510.
I'm from 310.
Where are you from?
I'm from California.
The state where the roadmap of memories I feel connected. Follow the 101 from the Golden Gate
To
Bridge.
downtown Los Angeles. Take the 5 to the 55 to the 405 to Irvine.
From the 405 to 55 to 5 to Anaheim.
From the 5 to the 101 to the 110 to the 10 West.
Koreatown is where I'll start a family.
No. Where are you from?
Our families are from the Philippines. My mom is from Las Piñas City, Metro Manila.
Gonzaga, Cagayan. My dad is from Cabugao, Ilocos Sur.
Binakayan, Cavite.
My parents speak
Tagalog,
Ilocano,
and I only understand it. I speak English, and they understand it as Americanized. Haven't I written this poem before?
But let me get back to your question. My family is from a sweltering country that is fattened by pork barrels and fried by a burning question.
Bakit ba ito nangyari? Bakit ba ito nangyari? Bakit ba ito nangyari?
I'm not going to translate because it will lose its meaning.
Meaning, why should the Philippines trust a country that doesn't let it speak for itself?
I know what is happening. I know what you are trying to ask me.
I know what you are going to say next. No, I am not from a lumpia you ate at a friend's birthday party. No, I am not from a halo-halo you ordered at Jollibee. No, I am not from a balut you saw on a rerun episode of Fear Factor. No, I am not from a nurse that examined you months ago and was so hospitable. No, I am not from a dream vacation to sleep on white beaches. No, I am not from a whale shark on a billboard that said, everything is fun there. We are not from the preconceived notions of where you think we are from. So, where are you from? I come from a place, the same place.
Where you ask yourself the same question.
Where am I from?
And the answer should always be,
I'm from here, right here.
In many ways, Southern California is a microcosm of the United States, which itself is a nation of immigrants, a fusion of different cultures, histories, and legacies. In LA County alone, there are around 96,000 Ethiopian immigrants and descendants. Some have a surprising lineage. You'll never know who you're sitting next to from at least 6 feet away until you hear their story. Here is Lost Tribes by Aiden Kay.
I am a child of story. My family is built on them, and everything I do is shaped by them. One story that has strongly shaped my life is the one my grandmother has always told me about her great aunt, Queen Zoditu, who, yes, you heard it right, was the queen of my family's homeland, Ethiopia, and appointed Emperor Haile Selassie to rule after her. My grandmother told me how he, along with both of my grandfathers, helped defeat the Italians when they tried to occupy the country during World War II. Never forget to fight for what you believe, she always said, as any good grandma should, but don't fight even after the war is done. The war's over. The Italians aren't enemies anymore, so if you find a good one, get married. It's high time. She wants great grandkids, and I am not necessarily ready for that. But my dad and uncles and my mom also agree they want some kids, or too. But they tell a different story, one that merges their family's fight for justice in Ethiopia and their fight for the same in America. They were king amongst kings back home. They built up their towns with businesses and schools and churches. But in America, they picked tomatoes as migrant workers and filled gas tanks and parked cars in Beverly Hills. They began at the bottom. And my mom tells me how her white neighbor in Carson wanted nothing to do with her when she moved in next door, calling her things she had never heard in Ethiopia, even covering her kids' eyes so they wouldn't see a black person. And then eventually they became like sisters when she moved out. This was America as an Ethiopian. These stories have become a part of my consciousness. They have been vital in helping me navigate communities in America, a country still untangling its own story, its own identity, its own fight. And just as America seems it's straddling two worlds, one of the old order and one of the new, I straddle two worlds as an Ethiopian American. One ancient, the other young. One traditional, the other irreverent. One homogenous, the other diverse. One my parents and the other mine. And now it's high time I make my own stories and have some dignity, as my grandmother would say. I mean, there's no way I can top being a queen of a country, but I'll do my best as a first-generation Ethiopian American. Now, the song I'm about to sing is a song that's going to be on my album Lost Tribes, which I'll be recording in July. I wrote this song, it's called I and I, when I realized that though I may feel lost on this journey, I'm not alone. I said I can't stop the window. I can't stop the rain. No, you won't hear no thunder calling out my name. I said I can't make the sunrise, and I can't part the seas, but you and I and you can do most anything. I said when the fire it keeps burning, and the winds they fail to cease. Say when the journey comes a burden, and my soul just needs release. I said I can't stop the wind now. Said I can't part the seas, but you and I, said I and you can do most anything. I said if you hold on, said if you hold on, said if you hold on to my hand, said if you hold on, said if you hold on, said if you hold on to my hand, then I and you and I can do most anything. I said when the winds, yeah, they keep blowing, and my house it comes unfolding, said who will heal my burdened mother, who will mend my brother's needs. I said no, I can't stop the wind, no. Said I can't part the seas, but you and I, said I and you can do most anything. I said if you hold on, said if you hold on now, said if you hold on to my hand, said if you hold on, said if you hold on, said if you hold on to my hand, then I and you and I, said I and you and I, said I and you and I can do most anything. Thank you, guys.
Now, we'll continue this deeper listen. For that, allow me to introduce you to the award-winning designer, developer, and data journalist. She's the data editor for KPCC and LAist and co-editor and developer of Race in LA. Here is Dana Unheard.
Hi there, Bruce. So Race in LA is this new series that we have from KPCC LAist. We launched back in June. We ask Angelenos how race and identity shape their day-to-day lives, and we ask them to tell us about their lived experiences in a personal essay. The essays are written by both community contributors and LAist staffers, and we publish one every Friday. Our goal is to fuel meaningful and ongoing conversations about race like the ones we have tonight.
That's fantastic. So let's get into this conversation and begin by bringing out our storytellers. Please welcome back to our stage, Cheryl Farrell, Eddie M. Ghana Jr., and Aiden K. Thank you for joining us.
Hi.
Hey there, glad to be back.
Hey.
Hey.
So good to see you all. So good to revisit your stories and hear these stories again. So good for everyone to get a chance to take a deeper listen at these lived experiences. And we want to just jump on in and catch up a bit. What has changed for you in the vein of your story since you first shared it with us on Unheard LA? And this is open to everybody. Cheryl, do you want to kick us off?
Oh, thank you. Good to see everybody. You know, it's interesting, that story was first broadcast in 2018, 2 years ago, and the focus was on describing community. The producers at Unheard LA said, tell us about your community, comma, however you define it. That opened me up to look at community beyond just zip code or area code. But now, 2 years later, the question is, why is that community so important in the first place? And it's helping me cope with racism, this pandemic. So same story, just pivoting the emphasis a little bit.
Thank you. Eddie, Aiden, which one would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, similar note with Cheryl, like surviving this pandemic and what's been going on in this country and with racism, and it's not new, it's just now brought to a light, and there's more attention now centered on it. And so with the piece of Where You From, where we explore feeling othered, we see that, I experience that still today, with the, how they look at the coronavirus and associated with the Asian American community. And so I still feel that, and I have some personal experience as well too that I'm happy to share later on. But it's all been a process, taking it day by day, and trying to be as safe at home as possible.
Right. Aiden?
Yeah, and I think for me, that was, I think, 2-3 years now, and it's nice, it's refreshing to kind of have the arts, I think, as a musician, to kind of get through this time and to kind of be self-reflective. But also just looking at our videos, seeing how important it was to have a public space to share these stories and to be heard in our communities. I think it's just, looking back now, I'm very appreciative of having that and having this opportunity, to continue to do that.
Thank you. And we're glad you joined us for that and got to tell that story, because always as we continue on Unheard LA, your story also happens to be the story of somebody else that's listening somewhere else in Southern California, or perhaps even the world, that they can relate to. Dana, I believe you're about to.
Yeah, so one of the things that I want to just jump right in. So Cheryl, your piece, I love the sisterhood. Power to the sisterhood. One of the things that you talked about in your piece was code switching and just having to present as really a different person to different audiences. Like you're with your white friend who's like, you're so, overly sensitive about this. And then your sister girl is like, nah, I get you. I got you. And it's just like, one word, and it's like, nah, I totally understand. And this is for the whole group. I'm wondering, in this moment of racial reckoning that we're in right now, how do you all see the role of code switching in society right now? Is it something that we still need? Is it something that's more necessary, less necessary? I mean, what do you guys think?
Well, I think code switching is just a fancy dancy word for putting on the face to have another person feel less threatened. And that's been going on since day one. I've been Black a few years and I've been doing it the whole time. And it becomes tiresome. I think in this time of reckoning, we are examining it and looking at it and realizing, wow, that's a burden to carry. One example, and it happens all the time, but I was traveling in another job and I was on first class, and I would go towards first class, and the flight attendant stood in front of me, pointing me to the other direction. You know, this is first class. And I said, well, thank you. I have a ticket for first class. And then I sat next to a gentleman who visibly was not comfortable with me there. And I said, here I go. I got to credential myself. And so I saw he had a magazine about fly fishing. And I said, you know, I'm fly fishing has a Zen quality to it. What do you think? Man, he was chatting with me the whole time, 3,000 miles. And so while it is just something you do, it's just something you do, and we still need to do it.
Do any of you feel like it can sometimes be a matter of not just, I don't want to say a defense mechanism, but almost a matter of survival, like a matter of life and death?
I think, especially when we're thinking about police brutality. I mean, even me getting pulled over versus some of my cousins, you know, and, you know, depending on, you know, how you've kind of learned to speak, or again, being able to speak to them in certain ways, there's all these, you know, things you have to think about. Yeah, that sometimes it is survival, and sometimes it's a daily survival, like at your job, getting the job, getting, you know, getting in the door. You know, it's a shame because in some ways I think publicly right now, and I love on social media, and I just love that this younger generation is able to speak their thoughts and speak it the way that they want to speak it. I think social media lends itself to that, but I think there's still some truth to this whole survival thing that, you know, outside of our phones, you know, what does that look like on a day-to-day? Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, like with the workplace, or and how I speak at the work, or when I also get pulled over by the police, and then talking about accessible and the language that's out there, like social media, that's a huge thing right now. Like Insta stories, that's how you get like a lot of your information. And so you see that a lot with the youth and folks who are, you know, savvy with technology. It's a good way to inform others, to be sure that the correct information is out there, and then able to have a forum for discussion about like code switching, about what racism looks like. Again, just how we can protect each other. So it's good that we have those forums to speak on it.
Yeah, code switching. I did not realize that it was actually what I was doing my entire life until I was in high school, and Dr. Michael Eric Dyson came to my school and he spoke to us about a couple of things, and I found out there was a term for this survival mechanism that I was employing on a regular basis. You know, employing when I would come in contact with law enforcement as a youth walking to school, or I would employ when trouble was bearing down on me in some way, in a way to make myself less threatening, or a way to make myself softer in the eyes of whoever was coming at me. And I didn't realize that that's what I was doing, or that there was a word for it, until I learned that there was something for it. But it's always been a mechanism of survival, whether it's about surviving this interaction with law enforcement, or surviving this job interview, or surviving these college admissions, or surviving your first couple weeks on campus at a new school where you don't know anybody, or where you're the only other Black person or Asian person, or any other person of color, like on that campus. Like it's always been a tool or a shield that has been used. I make it a personal point to try to not actively do it as much. Like, for instance, I like to do really important things in a hoodie because I like hoodies, and I am of no threat to you unless you want me to be. would like to be able to present myself as I am and speak as I do, and not have to alter that just to survive, but it's still entirely necessary.
Right.
So do you feel like with this double consciousness almost that code switching creates within us, it's like you have to be one person maybe at work or one person at school, or you're a totally different person at home and with your friends and your family, this sort of like almost split personality that you have, this split identity that you have. It's almost like we need as communities, as people of color, to like carve out safe spaces for ourselves, to carve out like safe communities for ourselves where we can just be ourselves and not have to worry about this code switching and the back and forth. And Cheryl, the sisterhood, as you talk of it, is kind of like one of those safe spaces where you can just be yourself. So my question for you all is, how do we go about carving out these safe spaces, these places of relatability for ourselves when we can just be understood and appreciated? I mean, they don't necessarily have to be defined by race or gender or age, but just commonalities. I mean, how do we do that for ourselves to protect ourselves and to insulate from the traumas of racism?
You know, I think it's a pretty sad question to ask, how we can be our different selves. Ideally, I want to be me at every beat of my heart, wherever I am. Mm-hmm. And the switching has become so ingrained in what I do, it's almost become unconscious, subconscious. You know, you just don't recognize that you're doing it. And so carving out the space to me isn't as important as having moments where I can say what I want to say, be what I want to be, and then get through it. This code switching is to get the transaction done. I want to be able to go to the grocery store, buy some groceries, and get out of there. I don't want this extra work of making the cashier feel comfortable with me or buying shoes. And so I hear your point about carving out a space, but I think it's more about finding a way to be at peace every minute of your life with whoever you're with and live that authentically.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you, Cheryl. Like that's why I think the failure of a lot of inclusion initiatives are they're about, hey, this is the space that exists, and we'll let a few people who aren't like us in, and that's where I feel like they failed us in a lot of different ways, because it's never about making the space as it is safe for everyone. Right. It's just about letting someone in to this treacherous space and hoping they survive.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe, you know.
So rather than like, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh,
Eddie.
go ahead. Oh, I was going to add, I think that's also important to have ownership. For me, myself, I'm an artist. I'm also an organizer. And so I've created a space with Stephanie Sajor, who also says hi, and to everyone here, my partner. And so with Stephanie Sajor and with Janice Apigao. And so for us three, we created a space called Sunday Jump. And that was very intentional to have this space in historic Filipino town, so that we could share our stories, so that we could connect with other communities, with all marginalized communities, actually, with people of color, as we've seen, especially in that area with gentrification on the rise and communities of color, families of color being pushed out. And so in that way, in the grassroots, in the hands of the people, having a space, a safe space, a brave space where we can share our stories and connect with one another. And we've been doing that now for 7 years now, going on to eight. And it's been a fun ride. And we're not the only space. There's so many other spaces out there. Shouts out to Choose Night Cafe. There's the Poetry Lounge that's right near Little Ethiopia. And so many spaces where you can share your stories and be yourself. Yeah.
So outside of some of these safe spaces that, unfortunately, like Cheryl said, that we've created for ourselves because we don't feel integrated into just the regular space where we can just be authentic and be ourselves, because And because we want to be accepted and we should be accepted, like everybody else. I mean, until that happens, until we can all be, like you said, authentic with every heartbeat and with everything that we do, I mean, this othering and this marginalization that we feel as people of color in our society, like, where do we go with this? Like, what do we do with that mental and emotional baggage that comes with that? Like, when that happens to you all, what goes through your mind? Like, how does that, like, what's your thought process? Like, what goes through you?
You know what's super important for me is having, I think just like the sisterhood is like having my family, having people who you can talk to. I'm realizing how important friends and family have been right now, but especially during those times in the workplace where just insane racism that is completely unwarranted. But to have somebody reflect you and respect you and hear you. And I think there's just such richness to reflecting one another and just like having that sigh of relief, because then you're just like, okay, that's not me. Their response to me is not who I am. And so now I can be who I am with the people who love me. And then so quickly you can release that. But I think when that pain or that anger lingers and that bitterness that can come from feeling so marginalized and unjustifiably like just wrong on a daily basis, it can create, if you don't have somewhere, some people or, you know, God or like prayer, you know, there's so many things. I think so many places look to the church, music, as Eddie was saying. If you don't have that, I think it's very hard because you have no choice but to, you know, either become hardened or completely give up, you know. But when you can release it, I feel like it helps you to be like, oh yeah, this is who I really am. This is who my whatever mom knows me to be, or my cousin or my loved one, you know. So you don't forget who you are, and no one can define you. To Cheryl's point, you define yourself. The people who love you define you, you know, which is super powerful. But you know, you have to, it's a daily, you know, you need that love in your life, otherwise, you know, you get lost. Understandably, it's very hard.
You know, one of the
process.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely.
One of the things I've been able to do in, I guess, the last few months with the protests and thing is to channel this frustration in ways that I didn't feel comfortable before. There's this, growing up, this idea of stay in your place and don't rock the boat. Even though you're feeling these grievances, you just don't want to say anything. Now, I am not holding back. I am calling people out. And I'll try to do it in a way that's not too hostile, but bad news is hard for a lot of people to hear, even if you say it gently. And I was telling a friend of mine, I consider myself Counselor Troy of racism. You know, that character on Star Trek who was the empathetic voice for the captain. So when I'm seeing things in the workplace, or when there are advertisers that are doing things that are clearly an affront to people of color, I'm not hesitating firing up an email or making a phone call. And that has helped carrying this burden, that I don't have to bottle it up. Now I can unapologetically say, this won't do. You can't tell me that I won't get a raise because my white female counterpart needs it more than I do.
I'm so sorry, Cheryl. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. It's just this idea of being able to articulate it now. It isn't curing anything, but it certainly provides a bit of relief.
So what I was going to follow up with was, it's interesting that you mentioned this idea of, you know, you're not afraid to call people out on this today. And I think a lot of people are in that headspace today. We've got, I hate this term, but we call it this Karen culture, where we've got, you know, these responses to people being outed as a racist in response to people being, quite frankly, awful people. In response to, you know, people jogging while Black, or barbecuing while Black, or golfing while Black, or doing whatever while being a person of color, minding their own business in the world, and they've got a problem with it. I mean, it's sort of like, it's become so routine that it's almost extraordinary for us to call people out on being that way. It's almost like, it's like, oh, you're just being a Karen. I'm like, I mean, what do you guys make of that? Like, what do we like? What do we do with that?
Well, the calling out is important, and as much as people may hate to hear it and be called Karen, but what Karen is doing in those moments is weaponizing her white privilege,
Okay.
or weaponizing. I forgot the name for the male version, but when you're weaponizing your white privilege in order to call law enforcement or any kind of authority on a Black person for doing anything for just existing as being Black, you're weaponizing your status in this world against that person, and it may just result in me having a bad interaction with whoever you're calling, but far too often it results in death. So the stakes are very high. It's not just as simple as this person is being aggravating because they're throwing a fit in the store because they're not wearing a mask, but like that type of person gets people killed.
Right.
Just want to say that very plain.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with your assessment of that. Like I said, I hate the word, but I agree with the sentiment behind it, that sort of toxicity toward someone just existing in the world and going about with their daily life is unacceptable. I mean, it is deadly and it's fatal, and it's based in nothing but hatred for someone that is unlike you and your fear for them and what they could possibly do to you. That is 9 times out of 10, I've not seen yet that it is warranted or grounded in anything reasonable or substantial. So, I mean, but we have a lot of companies today, like and societal institutions saying, okay, well, I've got so-and-so who's been outed as this racist, as a Karen, or what say you. We're in a stance of solidarity with the person that they were expressing discrimination against. We're going to say we're going to cut ties with this person. We're going to fire this person, or we're no longer going to provide an endorsement contract to this person, or we're not going to do X, Y, or Z associated with this person. Do you guys think that that's a step in the right direction, or are these merely like PR stunts, or is it like a marketing gesture, or is it an empty gesture?
I just feel like with all these corporations, when, I think The Onion had a hilarious post. They're like, oh, we're going to apologize for all the Black people we never hired. So I'm not going to cry over one Karen being fired when the entire Black community in this country has been disenfranchised on so many levels. And the economics of that has just it's genocide on so many levels. And so for me to cry over one woman getting fired because she is using this systematic, genocide to keep her power, I really don't have any sympathy. And the corporations that are backing that and that have still not yet hired African Americans because, the pipeline, or, we just can't find them. The recruiters, we don't know where they are. HBCUs, I don't know. They don't want to come to us. It's like, okay, bruh. So no, I have no sympathy, at all.
I think this idea of companies being politically correct, or whatever the term is born out of recognizing that the bottom line is going to be affected. So if hearts aren't softened because they just see this as wrong, if they're motivated by keeping market share or their brand in a good place, then do the right thing, right? I guess how they get there isn't as important as they get there. And what's new in these recent events is that there's strong economic motivation to do the right thing. I think if you're on a board, tomorrow on a Zoom call, take a picture of the people on that board and put it up on the screen and say, what's wrong with this picture? Right? We can't all go march. We all can't write a $50,000 check to NAACP, but right where we are, no matter what role we have, just put the picture up. What's wrong with this? And do it before public shaming motivates you. Get ahead of that curve. We're an evolved society. You shouldn't have to see, a bunch of Karens in order to do the right thing.
Right. You shouldn't take all that. Go ahead, Eddie.
Right. No, I just wanted to say, it's like, oh, we're caught. Now let's hold ourselves accountable. Right. So you made a good point there, Cheryl. Also want to mention too, like with the changes or, like people getting fired and whatnot, like looking at the country as a whole, and what we need is like the huge like policy changes, right? The huge campaign for the people's budget, the funding the police, refunding social services, getting to that. And I feel like with that, it'll lead towards like a larger change within society. We can have more safe spaces, not just like within an open mic space, but then amongst the entire nation. But then it's got to start somewhere. And the cancel culture, I mean, it's there, it's out there. But yeah, I mean, you see it going on. So.
Yeah, and there's always going to be a swing the pendulum swings in one direction, and then there's always an extreme swing in the other direction, as we see evidenced by having President Obama and then this swift swing towards 45. I just want to open it up to the audience out there. If you have any questions or comments you want to make, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll try to come to a couple of them in our conversation. Looking at what we have here right now. Cindy also let us know. She said, I learned that the term Karen about a month ago, and now I see it everywhere. Ken is the male version, I think. So that might be the name for that. There's some comments here about code switching. Melissa commented that code switching in the workplace leads to not being able to bring your authentic self, which results in disastrous and less productivity. It makes business sense to have psychological safety. To have, it does. I would have to agree. We shouldn't have to code switch to survive in the workplace. So keep on dropping those comments and dropping those questions in here. There's another question here about how much code switching is a part of reality in today's multicultural world. I think we should open this up to the rest of the group. But I think it's also very dangerous to fool yourself into thinking that because you see a multicultural world in your own realm, like in your own bubble, that does not mean that any of the systems of oppression have changed. It does not mean that any of the leadership has changed. It does not mean that any of these issues have been taken care of. We were not in a post-racial America during the Obama administration, and we were nowhere near going to be ever in a post-racial America. We might not find a post-racial America. So these systems of survival and methods that we use to navigate this world that is steeped and built upon white supremacy are very much still necessary for our survival. So just remember that out there at home, folks. It's still treacherous out there for a lot of people.
I agree. I was thinking of this story. It happened a couple of decades ago, actually, but I reported it a few years ago. And at worst, it was just annoying. It was disheartening. It was discouraging that, gee, I can't run and people are afraid of me. Now that same behavior will have you murdered in the streets, right? And so code switching could have been a survival mechanism for Ahmaud Arbery. There are people after he died said, well, that part of town, or, did he have to run alone, or, what? So yes, in answer to the question, being aware of what it takes to survive literally and figuratively is still going on. The only difference now is that other people who haven't experienced it are learning about it. And it seems so far-fetched, but I just take anybody on the street, person of color, put a mic up to them and ask them, give me one example of having to do this. And I guarantee you there'll be more than one example.
Yes, and anybody planning to go around the city and doing that, make sure you can compensate the people you're asking questions, because it is not okay to ask anybody to perform their paying for you, and definitely not okay to do it for free. Just a little PSA.
Appreciate labor, right?
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Go ahead, Dana.
I was gonna say, as we're talking about just the fact that you know, the Black community and code switching, and the fact that it's very necessary in instances. It's not just, it's literally and figuratively can be a survival mechanism. I mean, it's not just Black people who are othered and marginalized. I mean, we have allies that are with us in this Black Lives Matter movement who have their own stories to tell of, you know, racial trauma. I mean, Eddie, I wanted to go to you for a second. I mean, when we spoke, you had some interesting things to say about how you felt marginalized in this COVID-19 pandemic. And how, you know, I mean, we all know that, you know, hate crimes are on the rise, unfortunately, especially against Asian Americans, as, I mean, people are as insensitive saying things like, you know, the coronavirus came from China and therefore Asian Americans are somehow responsible for this, and mess like that. I mean, how has this personally affected you and your life experiences?
Yeah, well, definitely feeling othered. A sense of belonging is put out the door. Not feeling that I belong in this country. Thinking about my parents and the reasons for them to immigrate here, and with that, I mean, just taking it day by day, as I mentioned earlier. Like, I reflect back to even before this whole pandemic happened. Stephanie and I, we had a show at UCLA, and it was the Southeast Asian Conference. It was a beautiful evening. And so at the very end, we took a photo with hundreds of students there from the Philippines, Cambodia, Thailand, all over. And this is February, right? And so we posted on Instagram, and not too long after, we have a comment there. It's like, coronavirus. And this is, you know, before the whole shelter in place, all that. It was already going out there. Folks still believing that it is not real, that is fake news. And so that was an experience that we had. And it's like, where's this coming from? Like, it wasn't just like a troll, and then other folks within our circles were experiencing those same notions as well too. And she mentioned the rise in hate crimes. Yeah, definitely feeling excluded. And also just thinking about how that plays to stereotypes, right? So stereotypes, thinking like, oh yeah, it came from China. Okay, it affects all Asians. Thinking about even larger stereotypes like the model minority myth, and how, oh, we're all doctors, oh, we're all in the medical profession, and that's not true. I'm not a doctor. I wish. my mom wanted me to be a doctor, but I was like, no, I'm okay. It's okay, mom. It's okay, mom. So I became a mental health counselor instead, and an artist. And so with the whole model minority, though, like, spun in a positive light, but, you know, saying that you make all this money and all that, but really it was a way to pit us against each other, communities of color, as well as ignore issues that affect Asian Americans. And so we've seen that from time and time again, right? With police brutality, sanctioned violence against Black communities, and then say, oh, how about look at the Asian American population? How about them? That's a stereotype. It's not true. And it gets me upset when it gets brought up. And, you know, with the state of our nation today, it's just highlighted even more.
100%. I mean, it's almost as if we've taken the facts and just sort of contorted them into something that obviously is just ridiculously untrue. And it just goes to show the importance of being able to, like, you know, take ownership back of our own stories, and take being able to frame our own frame our stories in our own way, and make our voices heard the way that we want them to be heard. If that makes sense. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm trying.
No, you're good. You're good.
It makes me actually think of, as you were talking, Eddie, it made me think of the fact how all this attention that we've been putting on this phrase that we've been hearing about reframing the narrative, of reshaping the narrative, and then this idea of that we are erasing history in some senses, like the fact that we are trying to erase pieces of our past with like Confederate monuments, like trying to take them down. When you were saying that, coronavirus somehow is Asian Americans' fault because, this and that, it's sort of like, well, wait a second. With the Confederate monuments, it's like, why are we not placing the blame where blame belongs? It's like with the people who made the Confederacy, slavery is not Black people's fault. We did not ask to come here. I mean, like, when did this part of the narrative come about? I mean, like, we did not do this to ourselves. So, I mean, I'd love to talk about this for a few minutes. Okay. I mean, Aiden, your piece is all about, stories and the importance of stories. And I mean, America's story it's beautiful, but it's ugly. I mean, there's a lot we can learn from it, but there's a lot that we have to come to terms with at the same time. There's a lot that we need to reckon with as a people and as a country. And there's a lot that we have swept under the rug for decades and centuries that it's going to take a long time to overcome. I mean, 400 years worth of, slavery history to reckon with. I mean, how do you think, let's start with the Confederate statues. I mean, are we erasing the past by trying to take them down? Are we trying to modify history? I mean, what do you guys think?
I just read, I think on NPR, that the John Muir, he was, kind of celebrated as a conservationist, right? Mm-hmm. So, and like the Sierra Club has like touted him. They've named forests after him, but then you think, okay, well, there's no indigenous people on your board. It's a very, whitewashed board. And this land really isn't any of our lands, period. We came here. The first genocide was the Native Americans. Then they brought the Africans and then slaughtered, Africans. And so now when we're slaughtering your idols or these stories that are based on murder and, raping and pillaging, the whole colonialism thing, like, it's like, okay, we have to really rethink, like, where do we want this story to start? Right? As a historian, as I studied history, and it's very interesting where you start a narrative. If I start the narrative at 1700, 1776, America was founded by a certain group. Again, they're the protagonists in that story. If you start the narrative at 3000, and you start looking at where did we all come from? How did we travel here? What did this look like? Or who was here before any of us got here? And, just certain books, like there's a book like behind me, like they came before Columbus. Africans used to come back and forth between the African continent and North America and South America. This was a norm. This is not at all a part of the story. I mean, African, so when I'm saying this colonial, these monuments, these are monuments that uplift a story based on a certain protagonist, which is the Europeans who escaped. And let's be clear, when they escaped when they escaped Europe, these were not the wealthiest. These were some of the poorest, the most uneducated. They used to get, so they were not coming here with a mindset of wealth, health, and happiness, and we're here to just like, shake it up with the native. No, they are trying to get out of misery. And so misery came here. So, and I think it's healthy for all of us to really look at that and be real, because it's healing for all of us. It's healing for European, people of European descent. It's healing for, of course, Africans and natives. Definitely. I mean, I feel like their story needs to be, complete. They need to be leading this nation in a lot of ways, in my opinion. And the Africans, who've come, hearing these real stories, just removing these idols and these statues is just a space to then say, okay, who else are these protagonists? Where do these stories start? And how can we really start hearing what all of our collective history really is, so that we can build a new future? Until we do that, there's no chance.
So what about...
I'm sorry. I was going to add that what we're talking about is human cultural change, and we have to start somewhere. And I think the present is a good way to start. We can get distracted talking about statues and flags, and those, I don't mean to minimize the importance of that, but what started the discussion about statues is someone died and on a camera rolling with someone having their knee on his neck. That's what we ought to be talking about, right? I get it. This is how people were raised and this is what they know, but let's not take our eye off of what's really happening. People are dying, and this young man wasn't the first. He's a long list of people that have died through police brutality. And not to be snarky or cynical, but it seems like a hashtag is made after them and then we move on. And it's not happening this time. And it's really frustrating for people why they can't understand why it isn't the way it used to be. We'll have our discussions, we'll do a little kumbaya, and we'll go back. And so I think this idea of changing the narrative is like starting in the present. And I say this a little lightheartedly, but make a Black friend. Get a real friend, not just a social media friend, but a real friend. And have conversations with them. It doesn't have to be conversations about race. It could be about gardening. It could be about hair. But in the course of those real conversations, you'll pick up on those things that are at the seed of this anger and this frustration for people of color. And then the other thing is, when you have your dinner or call with your friend, don't qualify it by saying, I'm going to talk to my Black friend today. Because that kind of stuff the kids are picking up on. There was a study that said children at the age of 4 pick up on racial stereotypes. So as adults, if you want to model the way for a better way, get to know people who don't look like you and make sure that you are regarding them in a way so that your children are picking up the proper cues. And we can work on the flags, we can work on the statues, but today it's about making sure that people have access to employment opportunities that they deserve, without having to fight all that other stuff. I'm off my soapbox now, but that's
no,
it's okay. It's okay. You got it.
Yeah, no, it was starting in the present, like starting where you currently are right now is right. Very important for a lot of people, but for a lot of people that involves digging into your past, because let us not forget that the lost cause, which is the alternate reality story of the Civil War, which is that it was about states' rights. And don't forget, all these statues about all these Confederate generals came up long after that war was lost. The Confederacy only lasted for 4 years, it's just give or take, like these, and the American people were indoctrinated with the wrong information for a very long time. Like, it was in our textbooks until at least like the 70s, right, where a lot of people were taught the lies about American history. So I think what we need a lot right now, and we talk about reframing the narrative, like, we're not reframing the narrative, we're trying to tell the truth.
There it is.
And that's a very different thing. Like if we know the true history of this country and the way it works and the way it's made, that will change a lot of things. So taking down these statues and taking down these flags and stopping the flow of misinformation, I think will go a long way, or at least I hope it will.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to echo that, like you mentioned, like telling that truth, you talk about like reframing. It's also like, rediscovering. Going back to what Aiden talked about, like the history of colonization, the history of genocide, like who is writing the narrative. It's about rediscovering like what happened, and then connecting it to where we are today. To like, in order to know where we're at, we have to know where we came from, right? And then to know where we're going. It's a destination, it's a journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you guys hit the nail on the head when you're saying, it's about telling the truth and it's about rediscovering, not so much like just shifting it or turning it around. I mean, Bruce, when you were talking, I immediately thought about how we teach about slavery versus how here in the US versus how Germany teaches about the Holocaust. There have been many arguments made that, well, Germany, they keep concentration camps open as like a place to learn about the history and to make sure that it never repeats itself, that it never ever happens again. And you look in the US, yeah, we have slave plantations that are still around, but God, we have people that use them as wedding venues. I mean, my God, what does that say about us? I mean, we have, tours of slave plantations, and yeah, people are learning the history, but they also want to get married at them. I'm like, seriously, in front of a slave cabin? I mean, what are we saying with that? I mean, are we like, it's like something is lost in translation. It's like, how are we? It's like we're emphasizing the wrong thing about the history. It's like they want to emphasize the gloriousness of the antebellum South, and it's like, and these, this glorious past, but it's like, it was not glorious for everyone. It was quite horrible and horrendous for most of us involved. I mean, it's just sort of like you said, Bruce, tell the truth and rediscover, and like you said, Eddie, rediscover that what the real story was.
And a reverence, I feel, for the humanity. I feel like African American, that history has dehumanized the people and the culture and the history, the families, and the reverence that is deserved for that history is just still, I think it's coming now. I think people are maybe starting to see it because of this pandemic. Maybe this fear of death has caused a sympathy for the level of just disdain for Africans and African Americans in this country, but the deserved reverence, and respect. It's just like you said, there should be the weddings there. It should be a place where you go and you reflect. Like there's a museum, in the South of lynchings. That is a place to feel and to remember and to honor, and not to ignore.
Yes.
It's sad.
Yes. Anybody else want to weigh in before we wrap up?
Well, I just want to offer one last point in that there was a reception at the end of this storytelling event a couple of years ago. And so people would come up and give reactions to our stories. So I just finished with the Sisterhood of Black Women, or 50. And an older white man approached me and he said, "May I be in the sisterhood?" I said, "Well, we're open. We got open membership." But what he was saying was he could relate to not feeling a part of his own community. So this issue about being Black or a woman or whatever your attribute, it's a human phenomenon where you can feel outside of your community. And so if we do that for everyone, then we're not leaving anyone out. We're not just going to embrace the people of color. We're going to make sure that everyone feels included. Everyone brings a difference of some sort, regardless of their skin color and if we just have this attitude of inclusion, attitude of being included, I think that can make a collective difference in, it'll be a small shift, but if we all work to that end, it can make a difference.
Yeah, and I do believe a lot of that shifting will come with further exposure,
Yes.
further contact, further communication, further information sharing. There's one comment that came out of the chat about being a part of the school curriculum. If all the kids were taken to the African American Museum and the Japanese Museum and the Korean Cultural Center and the Museum of Tolerance and to all these different places, but it's like if a lot of those programs are already in place. They have kids coming into contact with this information on a regular basis, but it's important to understand that racism, anti-Blackness, all this stuff is like white supremacy. This is in the air that we breathe every day. And it's not enough. It's not enough just to claim that you're not racist. You have to actively be anti-racist, and you have to actively do that work every single day. And everybody has to do that work. Nobody's immune from that work. And when like it's been said, you see it all over a lot of places. When all lives cannot matter until Black lives matter. When Black lives matter, that is I personally believe that is the path for everyone. Like anti-Blackness is like the base that this is built on. And if we can get through that, if we can deal with that, if we can wrestle with that, then we can open it up so that we can be available and open to accept and welcome our entire community. And it's not about doing it one at a time either. You do not marginalize one group in favor of the other. That is not the way to do it. It's all got to be done at the same time. And if it's hard, then you're probably doing it. Then you're probably doing the work. It's supposed to be hard. There's no way that this can be easy. This is a lot of layers of systemic, historic oppression and lies that have been fed to us. It's a lot of reprogramming. That's the last thing I have to say on this topic. Does anybody have any parting words before we wrap up? Any parting words?
I mean, I was just thinking that, like, yeah, with putting in that labor, putting in that work, it's okay to have those uncomfortable conversations. And for me, being Filipino American, recognizing the history of anti-Blackness that still runs rampant in my community today, which stems from the colonization of the Philippines. If you think back to like the Spanish, you think about to American imperialism. And so, and that could look like today with my mom. I love you, Mom. Love you, Dad. But with them saying like, oh, you're out playing basketball so much. Don't do that. You're getting so dark, right? But then me having a conversation with my mom, like, hey, Mom, why is that? How come you say that? I love my skin being brown. And starting there. So it can start like a conversation at home. It can then transform into perhaps then marching in the streets, signing petitions, lobbying, all the different ways that we can challenge these systems of oppression that affect us today. And it all starts with just putting in that work, Bruce. So I just want to say, agree with that.
Put in that work and talk to your family, folks. Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I'm grateful for this platform, and I'll just end with, get a Black friend. Just find a Black friend.
Aiden, any parting words for our audience?
I just want to say, I know it's hard to kind of dig deep, and I know especially if you haven't been used to that with your family, it's a learned thing to have to deal with a lot of these emotions, and sometimes it's overwhelming. But it's worth it for each of us, and it's worth it, as a nation, but mainly for each of us as human beings. You'll feel a lot less stressed out, I'm telling you, once you deal with these things that are inside that are fighting. You feel release, so it's worth it.
Yeah, well, thank you all. That is our show, but that is not the end of the conversation. Homes, talk to your neighbor across the street, call up your grandmother, have these conversations, continue having these conversations, continue taking in the world that we're in, all the people that are here. Thank you all the folks at KPCC and LAist that make Unheard LA possible, and to Cheryl Farrell, Aiden K, Eddie M. Guyner Jr., Stephanie Sager, and the rest of our extended Unheard LA family. Thank you. Special thank you to Dana Amahir and the Race in LA Project for being a part of this event and being a catalyst for important conversations just like these. We are eternally grateful to the California Wellness Foundation for their generous support of Unheard LA. KPCC and LAist members out there, your support makes everything we do possible. Y'all, everybody has a story. So what's yours? Share with us at kpcc.org/unheardla. And while you're there, make sure you sign up for our Unheard LA newsletter. It's the best way to be the first to find out about what's next. Speaking of which, we'll be back for part 3 of A Deeper Listen series a week from today. Once again, thank you for joining us. And remember, whatever you do, don't leave your story unheard. Bless you. Good night.